Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I call this meeting of the Ncua board to order. I want to note for the record that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, today's meeting is open to the public through a live webcast only. The public may access the meeting by visiting the agency's homepage at www.ncua.gov and clicking on the provided webcast link. Additionally, presenters in today's webcast meeting are participating remotely, so if we experience any technical difficulties, I ask for everyone's patience. As we begin today's proceedings, please note if you would like to view the live closed captioning, please click on the panel labeled Multimedia Viewer found in the bottom right corner of your screen. You may also choose the layout to one of your choosing by clicking on the layout option on the top right side of your screen. Our recommended viewing option for this meeting is the stack view. The first item on our agenda today is a cybersecurity board briefing. Staff presenting, Ernie Chambers, Director of Critical Infrastructure, Office of Examination and Insurance. Staff available for questions, Kelly Lay, Director, Office of Examination and Insurance. Ernie, good morning. You may start whenever you are ready.
Good morning, Chairman Harper, Vice Chair Hoffman, and Board Member Hood. It is my pleasure again to present the semi-annual briefing on cybersecurity. Next slide, please. The topics I will cover today include the cybersecurity threatscape, an updated status on the progress of the Information Security Examination, ISE, and Cybersecurity Assessment Program, cybersecurity resources, cybersecurity guidance and risk alerts, industry best practices, and finally, I will quickly cover the Critical Infrastructure Division's continued involvement with industry outreach and its partner engagement activities. So, in characterizing the overall cyber threat, the environment is as volatile as it has ever been. Increasing dependency on technology exposes the credit union system to increased layers of risk, resulting from an expanded threat landscape. Generally, the prevalence of ransomware, malware, supply chain vulnerabilities, social engineering, business email compromises, insider threats, and other forms of historical cyber intrusion are creating challenges for credit unions of all sizes and, in our estimation, will continue to require ongoing measures for rapid detection, protection, response, and recovery. As COVID continues to have indeterminate impacts to our respective operational environments, coupled with the omnipresent hazard of fraud and financial crime, the threat landscape remains dynamic and ever-changing, continuing to create new risk. And though the Ncua remains at a heightened state of awareness regarding these threats, these risks are likely to continue and accelerate into the foreseeable future. That said, all of these phenomena, geopolitical tensions, supply chain issues, ransomware, COVID-19, and cyber criminality, provide the opportunity to underscore the cyber hygiene and operational resilience message that we at the Ncua and the financial sector more broadly have emphasized for the better part of a couple of years. At this time, I would like to briefly, but a little more deeply, address some of the observed trending threat types. Next slide, please. Geopolitical tensions. There is always room, it seems, for even more unexpected disruption, like the one we are currently experiencing play out between Ukraine and Russia, which portend yet more uncertainty in the information technology environment, as ongoing concerns related to the potential for Russian cyber retaliation remains a preeminent danger. The White House has warned that the Russian government is exploring options for potential cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in the United States, and the private sector must act to protect the critical services upon which all Americans rely. This warning was again re-emphasized on March 21st in response to U.S. sanctions, where the White House urged private sector firms to address known vulnerabilities and harden their cyber defenses given the increased possibility of Russian cyber attacks targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. The FBI and DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, have also released alerts that contain guidance after a recent attack upon a European satellite firm. While it must be said that the U.S. government has not detected specific targeting directed at the financial sector or our credit union ecosystem, it has witnessed preparations that include scanning websites and probing for known vulnerabilities. Security researchers continue to monitor disruptive and destructive cyber threat activity amidst Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine and believes a measured Russian cyber attack against the United States is a plausible contingency in some conflict scenarios. There is significant precedent for Russian use of disruptive and destructive tactics to support military and its political objectives, such as sabotage, punishment, and undermining public confidence in governments and institutions. Given the geopolitical situation, we continue to emphasize the importance of strong cybersecurity programs and testing for credit unions to ensure their resilience strategies are effective. Next slide, please. Moving on, relative to the other threats and risk, supply chain or third-party risk. Supply chain encompasses the entire life cycle of hardware, software, and services, and a diverse array of entities, including third-party vendors, suppliers, service providers, and end users. Supply chain risk is amplified by adversaries' attempts to exploit supply chains for purposes of espionage, sabotage, and foreign interference activity. Vulnerabilities in supply chains either developed intentionally for malicious intent or unintentionally through poor security practices can and do enable data and intellectual property theft, loss of confidence in the integrity of the system, or exploitation to cause system or network failure. Next slide, please. Ransomware. Ubiquitous ransomware, a favorite of both cybercriminals and nation-state actors, remains prevalent, and threat actors continue to hold stolen data in exchange for hefty paydays, putting organizations in the financial sector, along with their partners and customers, at constant risk of peril. Ransomware remains the fastest growing part of cybercrime. During the COVID-19 pandemic, ransomware attacks in general, according to McAfee's Hidden Cost of Cybercrime report, increased 148% from the baseline levels reported in February of 2020. One of the most concerning trends in ransomware is the shift towards targets in the manufacturing industry. Security researchers are beginning to see the emergence of ransomware strains targeting industrial control system, and millions in ransom has already been paid by industry victims who have fallen prey to these variants. This trend is likely to continue as factories and other industry operators prepare to expand their deployment of vulnerable IoT, Internet of Things devices throughout their premises, broadening the attack surface of their network and creating new targets for malicious actors. Cybercrime and fraud. To wrap up this portion of the briefing, cybercrime continues to impose heavy cost on financial institutions. Today, there are 5 billion unique user credentials, for example, username and password combinations, available on the darknet to cybercriminals, according to McAfee. These pilfered credentials can grant access to corporate networks or bank accounts. There are more than 15 billion pilfered credentials for sale on the darknet, 5 billion of which are unique first-time identifiers. The FBI's 2019 Internet Crime Report states some criminals buy credentials on darknet marketplaces where a single account costs on average $15.43, but the more sought-after banking credentials sell for an average of $71. Protecting an organization's information in a digitally connected world across a vast expanse of even more complex and interconnected web of business supply chain requires understanding not only one's own supply chain, but also the extended supply chains of third-party vendors, service providers, and customers. Next slide, please. Through all of the aforementioned, the NCUA's Information Security Examination and Cybersecurity Assessment Program continues to evolve while the focus remains postured and vigilant, with its primary efforts directed at advancing consistency, transparency, and accountability within the NCUA's Information Security Examination Program and providing credit unions with information and resources to improve their preparedness and resiliency, and increasing operational resilience in the credit union system to reduce systemic risk. To that end, I will now cover the Critical Infrastructure Division's progress on revitalizing the NCUA Information Security Examination ISE program, currently going through field testing by both NCUA and some state supervisory authority examiners. The objectives of the ISE program include evaluating management's ability to recognize, assess, monitor, and manage information systems and technology-related risk, assessing whether the credit union has sufficient expertise to adequately plan, direct, and manage information systems and technology operations, determining whether the board of directors has adopted and implemented adequate information systems and technology-related policies and procedures, evaluating the adequacy of internal information systems and technology controls and oversight to safeguard member information. Next slide, please. The ISE program provides a platform for a consistent review of measures used to comply with Graham-Leach-Bliley GLEBA security compliance with Part 748 and 749 of NCUA rules and regulations on all examinations. In addition, on risk-focused examinations, a review of information security controls is included. The ICE or ISE allows for improved examination flexibility for all asset sizes and complexity levels while provisioning examiners with standardized, guided core review steps and provides for advanced data collection and analyses. Finally, the ISE removed redundancies identified in Ncra's CU during the pilot and takes into consideration other lessons learned during that pilot. Next slide, please. As far as the work program levels of the ISE, there are 3 currently in testing: SCUPS, Core, and what we refer to as the Core Plus or Expanded. SCUP, the Small Credit Union Examination Program for credit unions of less than 50 million in asset size. For the first time, the exam has been specifically tailored to the smallest of our institutions and focuses on compliance with Part 748 and 749 of NCUA's regulations. Core, for risk-focused examination on credit unions of greater than 50 million in asset size. The examination builds on the SCUP exam to focus on compliance with Part 748 and 749 regulations and security controls. And Core Plus. Core Plus provides a risk-focused examination on credit unions that may need expanded reviews and deeper dives into specific operational areas and security controls. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit about the ISE program testing and the makeup of the testing group. ISE Work Program testing began on February 28, 2022, and will continue through the third quarter of 2022, with full implementation of the program planned at this time for the fourth quarter of 2022. There are approximately 100 members of the testing group, and they include ISE working group members, both national and regional IT specialists, regional information technology subject matter examiners, a select group of 15 examiners made up of new examiners, district examiners, and principal examiners without an IT examination specialty, and a number of state supervisory authority examiners. Process improvement feedback from the testing group is continuously evaluated and incorporated into the program. Next slide, please. Credit union leadership should be aware of critical cyber risk and take urgent steps to reduce the likelihood and impact of a potentially damaging compromise. All credit unions, regardless of size, are potentially vulnerable to cyber attacks. It is crucial that each organization does its part to improve the resilience, reducing the risk of compromise or severe business degradation. To that end, the Ncua recently updated its cybersecurity resources page so that credit unions have additional resources and guidance on the ever-changing cyber threat landscape. Those resources can be accessed by going to the Ncua Cybersecurity Resources webpage at www.ncua.cybersecurity.gov. Next slide, please. I would also like to take just a moment to reprise our progress and some interesting statistics regarding the Ncua's deployment and implementation of the ACET, the Automated Cybersecurity Evaluation Toolbox, as a follow-up from last October's briefing. Officially referred to as the Toolbox, this capability allows institutions to complete dozens of cybersecurity standards and assessments. The tool is located on and accessible from the Ncua Cybersecurity Resources webpage. As part of the Toolbox application, a credit union may even complete the Ransomware Ready Assessment, which is the DHS tool used to assess an institution's cyber posture with regard to preparedness and the ability to recover from a ransomware event. Note, the ACET Toolbox contains Ncua's downloadable application developed by the Ncua in conjunction with Idaho National Labs. The ACET Toolbox has been downloaded now over 2,500 times since its release in late October. Next slide, please. Given the current state of geopolitical events, the Ncua is encouraging credit unions of all sizes and their cybersecurity teams nationwide to adopt a heightened state of awareness and vigilance. In support of that urging, the Ncua has issued several cybersecurity advisories, risk alerts, and guidance products. For instance, Ncua Risk Alert, Heightened Risk of Social Engineering and Phishing Attacks, Ncua Alert on Current Geopolitical Events, Increasing Likelihood of Imminent Cyber Attacks on Financial Institutions, Ncua Cybersecurity Alert, Cyber Actors Targeting Ubiquitous Log4j Vulnerability, and finally, Ncua Risk Alert, Business Email Compromise through Exploitation of Cloud-Based Email Services, each of which provided brief descriptions of the threat phenomena along with associated mitigation actions and control measures to help protect against them. Next slide, please. The Ncua has made a concerted effort to provide credit unions with actionable and timely guidance, inclusive of best practices for cybersecurity, such as the principle of least privilege, the implementation of MFA or multi-factor authentication, backup and storage, and training in-house personnel. By issuing risk and cybersecurity alerts on events like the one cited and taking every opportunity to propagate the message of operational resilience and cyber hygiene, the Ncua can help assist its insured institutions to be situationally aware of those threats that may have a harmful impact to the overall credit union system. Next slide, please. The Ncua continues to partner with industry organizations to train and message its expectation and vision for the state of cybersecurity to the credit union system by supporting outreach events, providing training, maintaining transparency, and publishing alerts and notifications. Next slide, please. That, sir, concludes my presentation. We would be happy at this time to answer any questions.
Ernie, thank you for your timely and informative cybersecurity update. Today, more than ever, the NCUA and credit unions must maintain a heightened sense of alert posture against malicious cyber activity. In public appearances, I often get asked what keeps me awake at night. The answer almost always is the risks that cybersecurity attacks pose to our financial system. As Ernie and others have often noted, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased cybersecurity exposures for all, including federally insured credit unions. Additionally, the escalating Russian war on Ukraine has implications far beyond Eastern Europe. There remains the potential for imminent cyber attacks from Russia in retaliation for US support of Ukraine's government. Those include attacks on our homeland's critical infrastructure, including our financial services sector. As a result, all credit unions and vendors, regardless of size, are targets for cyber attacks. We therefore must all remain vigilant and take actions to safeguard our systems. And when attacks do occur, credit unions and their vendors should report any cyber incidents to their Ncua examiner, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center at www.ic3.gov, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at report@cisa.gov. Through its Shields Up initiative, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is providing real-time updates on cyber threats. I also encourage credit unions to download and use the NCUA's Automated Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool, or ASSET for short. This tool is an excellent resource, especially for small credit unions or credit unions with limited resources, to understand cybersecurity preparedness levels. The ASSET is available at no cost to credit unions and can be found on the NCUA's website at www.ncua.gov/cybersecurity. Additionally, as part of our 2022 Community Development Revolving Loan Fund program, the NCUA is once again providing eligible low-income credit unions with up to $10,000 in funding to modernize their information technology against cyber attacks. The application period for the Revolving Loan Fund opens on May 2nd and runs until June 24th. I encourage all eligible institutions to apply for these digital services and the other grants that are available through the program. The NCUA is also working to improve the credit union system's cyber resiliency through our examination program. Specifically, the NCUA is revising its cybersecurity examination procedures with the goal of completing this revamp by the end of the year. We must stay focused on meeting that goal of finalizing the implementation of the information security exam program in the fourth quarter. The new procedures also will be scaled to the size and the complexity of a credit union and will assist the credit union system in preparing for, withstanding, and recovering from cybersecurity threats. Ernie, I now have 3 questions for you. First, I've asked this before, what are the 3 most important actions a credit union, especially a small credit union, can take to improve its cyber resilience? Which resources should they utilize?
This is Ernie Chambers, sir. Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. Understanding one's cybersecurity posture via the conduct of a good and in-depth risk-based assessment is a great start. A risk-focused assessment that properly identifies where there may be gaps and addresses those issues amounts to a safe and sound operating imperative. Taking proactive steps such as the implementation of the ASSET Cybersecurity Maturity Assessment can help to mitigate the risk of a cybersecurity data breach. But there are many assessment tools that a credit union might employ to accomplish a risk-based assessment. There is the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool, the CSET, the FFIEC's Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, also known as the CAT, and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework are each suitable options accessible at no cost to an institution in assisting them to shore up their cybersecurity preparedness. Additionally, Good cyber hygiene is a general practice that can help an institution maintain safe and secure operations, and there are several best practices that we recommend to ensure an institution's cyber hygiene is the best it can be. In addition to the best practices I referenced in my presentation today, there's such as principle of least privilege, the implementation of MFA, backup and storage. There's also using network firewalls, installing reputable antivirus and malware software, and updating software regularly and installing patches. And then finally, setting strong passwords. Sir, that concludes my response.
Thank you, Ernie. I think you gave a wealth of resources there that are available at no cost to credit unions and really can help a credit union, even a credit union without an IT or information security team, to take important steps to protect itself. I urge all credit unions to follow Ernie's advice to protect themselves as well as their members. Additionally, many people would not immediately think that credit unions, especially small ones, could be potential targets of a foreign adversary. Ernie, could you explain the reasons why bad actors may target credit unions?
Again, sir, this is Ernie, and thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, credit unions, both large and small, are indeed potential domestic targets of our nation's foreign adversaries. This is for a number of reasons. First, one of our primary soft power tools as a country is that of our economy. The United States implemented economic sanctions, including limiting access to the US dollar on a number of Russian oligarchs and officials in response to their illegal invasion of Ukraine. A proportionate response from a foreign nation state could include a tactical tit-for-tat response in the form of cyber attacks on financial institutions, potentially limiting Americans' access to their money. This is on a large scale dangerous for the U.S. economy and is one reason we, along with the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency are so focused on spreading awareness about the need to remain hypervigilant. Second, these folks are not run-of-the-mill cyber criminals trying to steal money. They are highly skilled foreign adversaries that also attempt to sow political discord within the United States. Potentially cutting off millions of Americans from their finances is one way to do so. We're not crying wolf. Credit unions are an important part of our nation's critical economic infrastructure and must be protected. I encourage all credit unions to visit our cybersecurity resources webpage at www.ncua.gov/cybersecurity for more information, including our ACID toolkit, which, as you mentioned, sir, provides credit unions with information on their organization's cybersecurity posture. Sir, that concludes my response.
Thank you, Ernie. This last question may actually be better answered by Kelly Lay, who has joined us to answer questions. Late last year, Kelly, the federal banking agencies finalized a rule requiring a bank to notify its primary regulator of any significant computer security incident as soon as possible, but no later than 36 hours after identifying the problem. Kelly, would you tell us a bit more about that rulemaking and what NCUA staff are now exploring with respect to adopting a similar rule that meets the needs of the credit union system?
Good morning, Chairman. This is Kelly Lay, and yes, I'll take that question. So the federal banking agencies recently finalized computer security incident rulemaking to improve the sharing of information about cyber incidents that may affect the U.S. banking system. The final rule requires a banking organization to notify its primary federal regulator of any significant computer security incident as soon as possible and no later than 36 hours after the banking organization determines that a cyber incident has occurred. Notification is required for incidents that have materially affected or are reasonably likely to materially affect the viability of a banking organization's operations, its ability to deliver banking products and services, or the stability of the financial sector. In addition, the final rule requires a bank service provider to notify affected banking organization customers as soon as possible when the provider determines that it has experienced a computer security incident that has materially affected or is reasonably likely to materially affect banking organization customers for 4 or more hours. The Ncua is also exploring a cyber incident notification rule that meets the needs of the credit union system. Not only are we looking at what our fellow regulators recently adopted, but also at the new Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act to formulate our rulemaking. That concludes my response. Back to you, Chairman.
And Kelly, I understand that that was something that Congress passed recently, and it's going to require everyone to take further steps. In closing, briefings like this one are a critical part of the NCUA's communications efforts to promote cybersecurity best practices and raise awareness about the threats credit unions face. Each of us, the NCUA, state supervisory authorities, credit unions, and their vendors, has a responsibility to protect our IT systems, improve our collective ability to recover from incidents, educate our employees, share information, and report and address potential vulnerabilities. All of us must do our part to be cyber smart. That concludes my remarks. I now recognize Vice Chairman Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ernie, for that presentation. Your field of choice, cybersecurity, is a good one when it comes to job security. I will say the chairman started by saying what keeps him up at night. For me, what keeps me up at night is a 1-year-old son, so I have to say that. It's not. I wish it was Russians with computers. The cyber landscape continues to be fraught with threats. The current situation, as you mentioned, only adds to that challenge. And I want to congratulate you and your team for the rollout of our ACET, automated cybersecurity evaluation tool. 2,500 downloads, I think you said, since October. That's significant. Although we don't know which credit unions downloaded it, which I think is a good thing. That level of uptake, it's impressive. I got in last night from a credit union conference, and one thing about your new tool is that it gives me something to say when asked about cybersecurity. I've mentioned to you that this topic is always a bit tough for me since it's not something I consider myself fluent in. So I appreciate having something substantive to say to credit union CEOs, many of whom are also second language speakers when it comes to cyber risks. And as you said, since our last update, we've added the information security examination tool for our field staff, still in testing. Looks like roughly 100 NCUA and state examiners. There's the alignment between your assessment tool, ICE and ASEP, is worth noting. The extra effort to align the two tools will not only assist credit unions in building out their cybersecurity systems, but also provides credit unions with the elements of what they can expect during an examination. Knowing that our ACET can help credit unions prepare for their examination should alleviate some of the anxiety that comes with the cybersecurity audit. This saves time and money for the credit union. And in a moment after this, we're going to hear a presentation on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we all agree that DEI and financial inclusion are critical goals for NCUA. I mention this because every dollar a credit union must spend to comply with a rule or regulation, including cyber, is a dollar that isn't available to its members. When those rules and regulations are right size, that dollar is well spent. Credit unions aren't government agencies. They can't just keep adding stuff and adding staff. They often have to subtract and reduce, whether that be in terms of time, money, and staff. Only when we understand those limitations can NCUA truly say it cares about financial inclusion. I mentioned this, and here's my question to you, Ernest. This is what we spoke about in our briefing. Knowing that every credit union has finite resources, I'm asking you a version of Chairman Harper's question. What is the biggest bang for the buck that a credit union can do?
This is Ernie Chambers, sir, and thank you for that question. In this continually evolving budget-constrained environment, we recommend credit unions with limited resources and expertise implement the following. First, the ASET tool. It bears repeating. The ASET tool guides users through a step-by-step process to collect facility-specific information addressing topics such as hardware, software, administrative policies, and user obligations. It then compares that information to relevant security standards and regulations, assesses overall compliance, and provides appropriate recommendations for improving one's cybersecurity posture. Again, the ASET tool is not required in any way. What is foremost is that credit unions arm themselves with the ability to detect, protect, and respond to cyber threats. Completing a cybersecurity assessment, sir, any cybersecurity assessment will provide institutions with a snapshot of their cybersecurity strengths and weaknesses, which in turn provides valuable insights to inform their risk mitigation strategies and action plans moving forward. Second, we encourage credit unions to both learn and practice good cyber hygiene. I mentioned MFA, multi-factor authentication. I've also heard you express that, employing device encryption and backing up regularly. Sir, that concludes my response.
Excellent. I appreciate the focus on the tool. It also means that when I was at this convention this week, that was my answer. So I'm glad that was the most bang for the buck. And I mention this because I try to put myself in the position of somebody who's thinking about starting a credit union, seeing what do I have to do if I start a credit union, seeing cybersecurity regulation and thinking, oh, that's a big burden. I do know if they could speak directly to you, they'd be level-headed about this, right? To know what it is. You never know what will push somebody over the edge to give up on starting a credit union or maintaining a small one, right? So my last thing is, can you just pledge that all of NCUA's communication about cybersecurity is openly, directly mindful of the limited resources of many credit unions?
Sir, absolutely. We operate at the NCUA, as you well know, with a doubling down on transparency between our credit unions. I know I have made that, as well as under the direction of the OEI director, my boss, to make sure that we're transparent as possible in developing and making sure that we have a scalable tool that can assist the credit unions in accomplishing the goal of cybersecurity preparedness. That concludes my response, sir.
Appreciate it. Yeah, as you know, it can be so daunted. Even if somehow someone had the perfect cybersecurity system at their credit union, the nature of your business is that in a year and a half or so, it wouldn't be perfect anymore because things change so much. So I appreciate your understanding and pledge to be very direct about NCUA, knowing that credit unions have limited time and money. That is it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And, certainly size, scale, and scope ought to be at the heart of our consideration of any rule and regulation. It helps us to ensure a vibrant credit union system, but it also makes sure that credit unions are taking the appropriate steps within their resources and abilities to handle what they need to do. Board Member Hood, you are now recognized for any statement or questions that you might have.
Great, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ernie, I want to thank you for your very insightful presentation this morning. Like our chairman, if there's one issue that does keep me up at night, it really is cybersecurity. It's one of the top concerns I hear when I'm talking to credit union leaders around the country. I wish we could all say that after having focused on this threat for such a long time, we're making progress toward a real sustainable solution. But unfortunately, that's simply not the case, given the velocity and evolution of cybersecurity threats. As such, we have to accept that cybersecurity threats are an ongoing risk, both to financial institutions' operations and to their reputations. Moreover, we have to accept that the risk is a moving target. For example, a few years ago, most of us worried about data breaches, then now we're worrying about ransomware attacks. So as we all know, that's a threat where a threat actor seizes control of a system and demands ransom to be paid. But according to the IBM Securities Intelligence Threat Index for 2022, ransomware attacks were the most common type of cybersecurity incursion last year. The unfortunate downside to our system of greater connectivity is that it does create more points of vulnerability. And while we see a great deal of focus on cyber threats from nation-state actors, those make up a relatively smaller percentage of cyber attacks. The most serious threats are most likely to come from cyber criminals or from internal security threats, which can either be malicious or inadvertent. Every credit union must recognize that their institution is just one wrong email or malicious link away from being on the front pages. Given those realities, even those of us who favor a more balanced approach to regulatory matters, we must recognize that the agency's cybersecurity review and supervision capabilities would necessarily have to be more robust in the days ahead. When it comes to data protection and data security, credit unions need to lead the way. So please don't wait until your institution is compromised and your member owners are victims. I urge you to use the resources that are already available. And as a starting point, I too, like my fellow board members, recommend the cybersecurity assessment software tool that Ncua released last December. This topic gets me really choked up. We all have to accept that cybersecurity would be an ongoing responsibility. Gone are the days when you can have a vendor provide you with an add-on patch to address a vulnerability and simply move on. Today, we need to be thinking defense in depth when it comes to cybersecurity. That means not only addressing vulnerabilities and recognizing threats, but also having response plans in place that not only identify vulnerabilities, but also catch attacks in real time and proactively prevent their impact on an institution. It also means focusing on hardening and constantly upgrading systems against not only external, but also internal threat actors, and also working to educate and train employees and managers on a full range of potential threats. This simply won't be easy, but it's the non-negotiable reality of today's world. And the Ncua stands ready to work with credit unions to ensure that your institutions have the needed tools to stop these threats in real time and to protect the safety and soundness of our credit union system. With that in mind, you all, I do have a few questions, Ernie. One is, how do we look at crypto as it relates to cybersecurity? I know that's a big issue in our industry, especially as we look at a lot of work around digital assets.
This is Ernie, sir. Thank you for that question. Cryptocurrency is increasingly becoming a tool for cyber criminals. For example, Bitcoin accounts for a large percentage of ransomware payments. As we continue to evaluate how credit unions can innovate and enter the fintech space, cybersecurity will also be top of mind. Sir, that concludes my response.
Well, thank you, Ernie, but let's go a step further. Then, do you believe that ransomware identification programs that relay data to credit unions may often be too late to fix the breach? In other words, are programs that automatically fix credit union systems in real time a more appropriate solution, even if more costly?
Sir, Ernie Chambers again. Being proactive against ransomware attacks is easier than trying to recover from a ransomware attack. So detection tools are increasingly vital for safeguarding devices. I would suggest each credit union evaluate its cybersecurity risk posture and weigh the cost and benefits for those types of program offerings. Sir, that concludes my response.
Great, thank you. And Ernie, just to build on that, as we look at credit unions and asking them to evaluate their risk postures and opportunities, I would call on us at Ncua to do something similar. And that is why quite some time ago, I did ask the agency to look at having an outside vendor come and look at our cybersecurity program and let us know what are some things that we're doing well and what are some rooms for and opportunities for improvement. Could you maybe bring up to date with where we are with that request?
I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat that question?
Yes, I was saying that just as we call on credit unions to review and look at their cybersecurity profiles and outreach efforts, I would like to know, what are we at Ncua doing? I recently called on the agency to have an outside firm come and evaluate where we are, what are the lessons we can learn, what are some insight areas we can glean additional information from. And again, just wanted to know, do you know, where do we stand on having someone come and give us perhaps a peer review or an outside consultative opinion?
Thank you, sir, for that question. Indeed, I do believe that process is moving forward and is a very extremely positive development. And on your part, we are standing by to provide you a progress briefing sometime in the perhaps over the next 60 days as to the progress of said audit or assessment.
That sounds great. And then I just have one last question. I know that our agency works in collaboration with other entities around Washington. And we do a number of tabletop exercises and things of that nature. Can you talk about what you're seeing?
Absolutely, sir. And again, this is Ernie Chambers, and thanks for that question. The NCUA continues to participate alongside the other federal banking agency in the initial, midterm, and final planning phases of a myriad of tabletop exercise offerings issued from the U.S. Treasury Department, such as the Hamilton series of functional exercises that help to test incident coordination and communication policies and procedures. Additionally, certain national level exercises such as Cyberstorm, which is in its 8th iteration, is designed to provide a distributed venue for the national cyber incident response community to simulate the discovery of and response to a large-scale coordinated cyber incident impacting the nation's critical infrastructure. In September of 2021, the NCUA hosted its second successful virtual cybersecurity tabletop exercise to test the NCUA's supply chain risk management processes. Participants included representatives from credit unions, federal and state regulatory agencies, law enforcement, sector associations, information sharing organizations, CISA, and the U.S. Treasury Department. NCUA's participation and leadership in these types of exercise activities help it to further enhance its integration to the broader financial services and federal banking information infrastructure communities. Sir, that concludes my response.
Great. Thank you, Ernie. I have no further questions or comments. And again, I appreciate your hard work. And we're indeed fortunate to have someone with your expertise helping our agency and our industry address cybersecurity issues.
Thank you, Board Member Hood. That concludes our cybersecurity update briefing. The second and final item on our agenda today is a board update about the NCUA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program. Staff presenting, Miguel Polanco, Director, Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. Miguel, you may start at any time.
Good morning, members of the board, Chairman Harper, Vice Chairman Hopman, and Board Member Hood. Thank you for the opportunity to share highlights from the NCUA's 2021 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion activities. My name is Miguel Polanco. I'm the Director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, which leads these important activities. Next slide, please. Before we start, it's important to review how the OMWI was established. In 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act established a requirement for federal financial regulators to report annually on specific diversity standards. The Act also requires agencies to assess the diversity practices of regulated entities. Next slide, please. Our annual report to Congress, available on ncua.gov, addresses how the NCUA meets the requirements of the Dodd-Frank Act. I'll provide an update on the core components of the NCUA's DI activity as shown here. I'll also provide an update on the Minority Depository Institution Program, also known as the MDI program, before sharing some DEI opportunities my office has identified. Next slide, please. The NCUA's commitment to DEI is reflected in the annual policy statements described here. I want to personally thank not only our chairman, but each member of our board for their support of and commitment to equal employment opportunity and DEI practices. Next slide, please. Any discussion on DEI should start with the impact it has on how the NCUA and how credit unions perform. The NCUA's commitment to DEI is founded on the fact that when people are truly recognized and celebrated, we unleash their full potential. This is reflected through the broad array of skills they bring to the table, the insightful perspectives they offer, and the innovation they spur. The NCUA recognizes DEI as a best practice, an essential strategic imperative within organizations. We believe that a commitment to DEI offers credit unions a competitive advantage. Next slide, please. Now I'll cover some updates in our agency's DEI program. Next slide, please. When it comes to demographic representation, the standard comparison is the demographic representation found in the civilian labor force as of the 2010 census, as published by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC civilian labor force figures for the 2020 census are not yet available. Overall, women representation throughout the NCUA is approximately 5 percentage points lower than the civilian labor force, though we approach gender parity in our executive ranks. Women also made up 43% of new hires in 2021. Minority representation at the NCUA is approximately 3.5 percentage points higher than the civilian labor force. Among executives and managers, representation falls below the civilian labor force. In 2021, minorities made up approximately 42% of new hires. The NCUA continues to exceed federal goals for people with disabilities, as shown on this slide. Next slide, please. To promote such diversity, we use a variety of recruitment strategies, as shown here. This includes collaborative efforts, including the Recruitment Outreach Working Group, a partnership between our office, OMWI, and NCUA's Office of Human Resources. The group works to amplify the NCUA's outreach to different markets. Diversity is reflected within the group itself. Representatives from each region, our various employee resource groups, and the NCUA's Office of External Affairs and Communications also contribute. We also take advantage of the various disability employment programs and recruit at universities that attract large populations of people with disabilities. Our annual intern program for college and high school students allows us to introduce young professionals to the federal work environment. Next slide, please. The NCUA also works to retain such diverse talent. Next slide, please. We make intentional efforts to have all NCUA employees feel included in our workforce. I'm proud to share that over the past several years, we have established programs that help employees develop more awareness about each other, which over time helps bring about a sense of understanding, connection, and belonging. For example, at the end of 2021, almost 1/4 of NCUA staff had joined one or more employee resource groups. That's nearly 2.5 times the 10% benchmark for successful employee resource groups. Our Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Council identifies and advances essential elements of a high-performing organizational culture that allows the agency to achieve its mission. It also supports the agency's strategic goal of attracting, engaging, and retaining a highly skilled, diverse workforce and cultivating an inclusive environment. And it also advises leaders on strategic diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities. Our special emphasis program and inclusion speakers help elevate awareness and understanding of historically underrepresented communities such as minority groups, LGBTQ+ individuals, veterans, and people with disabilities. We reinforce our commitment to building connections across people and groups from diverse backgrounds through training and other developmental opportunities. This includes our mentor program, which has connected more than 330 employees since it began in 2016. These programs bring employees together and encourage them to recognize each other as more than workmates, but also as people with similar hopes, dreams, and aspirations. This level of connection among employees creates a sense of engagement and belonging that drive them to do their best work. Next slide, please. Supply diversity, which is the practice of intentionally seeking diverse suppliers, is a key practice at the NCUA and one that allows us to bring the full complement of the market to bear for solutions to agencies' needs. Engaging diverse suppliers has numerous benefits, from competitive pricing to innovative approaches. Diverse vendors help meet the agency's needs at costs and approaches that represent the best value to the NCUA. Engaging diverse suppliers also promotes job creation and stimulates local economies. Small business represent the fastest growing segment of the U.S. economy. Doing business with them advances economic recovery and sustainability in the communities they operate in or serve. Next slide, please. In 2021, NCUA awarded 37% of its reportable contract dollars to minority and women-owned businesses. This was driven through IT contracts, as well as contracts involving accounting, financial management, and facilities management. Next slide, please. Our success is due to UNWI's key partnership with the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, whose acquisition process has fully integrated supply diversity as part of its normal operations. UNWI also leverages its relationships with agency program offices to conduct market research to identify minority and women-owned businesses that are both competitive and responsive to the agency's needs. This has yielded consistent responses to high-profile Ncua contracting opportunities on the part of these firms. For our most prominent vendors, we also review their workforce demographic composition and workforce diversity good faith efforts. Next slide, please. To comply with Section 342 of Dodd-Frank, the Ncua is required to assess the diversity policies and practices of credit unions. In June 2015, the Ncua, along with 5 other federal financial regulators, published a final interagency policy statement to establish common standards the agencies use to assess the diversity policies and practices of regulated entities. Using these, the Ncua developed a Credit Union Diversity Self-Assessment, or CUTSA for short. Next slide, please. Credit unions can complete the CUTSA at any time to assess their performance against the following 5 standards. First, organizational commitment to diversity and inclusion. Second, workforce profile and employment practices. Third, supply diversity related to procurement and business practices. Fourth, practices to promote transparency on the credit union's diversity and inclusion program. And finally, the credit union's approach to its own self-assessment in diversity and inclusion. The CUTSA is voluntary. UNWI tabulates positive responses in the aggregate to provide the industry feedback on how the credit union system is doing on DEI. Access to CUTSA data is restricted to UNWI staff only and is not accessible to nor shared with any other Ncua office. A credit union's CUTSA has no impact on its CAMELS rating. The CUTSA is available at ncua.gov. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, diversity is a competitive advantage, and the CUTSA can help credit unions leverage it. Research shows that diverse organizations outperform those that are not 2-to-1. It also shows that organizations that embrace DEI are likely to benefit from better decision-making, more innovation, and higher employee satisfaction, one that leverages the unique skills of its diverse workforce. Credit unions that adopt DEI as a central principle can unleash their ability to tap underserved markets and develop new innovative products to more fully meet the needs of their members. Next slide, please. My staff are reviewing the 240 CUTSA submissions we received for the 2021 aggregate report. Here, you see the number of affirmative responses we received to at least one element within each standard. The vast majority of reporting credit unions reported at least some level of commitment on the part of their leaders, as well as engagement in diversity when it comes to workforce practices. An area of lower attainment among reporting credit unions was supply diversity. We are continuing to conduct analysis, and we will publish the full 2021 CUTSA report later this year. Next slide, please. The Ncua engages the credit union industry in various ways. First, through our annual DEI Summit. In 2021, our second DEI Summit was virtual and featured 20 DEI and financial inclusion sessions. More than 800 attendees gave the event such positive ratings, and the Ncua is offering a third summit in 2022. I encourage those participating in today's board meeting to view the 2021 DEI Summit sessions by going to the ncua.gov Diversity and Inclusion webpage under About Ncua and selecting Credit Union Diversity. Second, as I mentioned on the previous slide, CUTSA responses related to supply diversity suggest lower attainment rates and a need for more focus in this area. To help credit unions, the Ncua published a supply diversity guidebook in 2018 for credit unions interested in diversifying the vendors they use. We also offered a starter supply diversity webinar last August with a follow-on supply diversity panel during the DEI Summit from November this past year. These are available on NCUA's YouTube channel through ncua.gov. Although not an endorsement, the Credit Union DEI Collective is an organization within the credit union movement consisting of national credit union system organizations, partners, and service providers committed to creating inclusiveness in the workforce, in serving offerings, and in leadership. Together, they reflect the growing interest and need for DEI within the credit union movement. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to share how the Ncua is supporting minority depository institutions through our Access initiative. This work has been primarily managed by the Ncua Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion in partnership with the Ncua's regional offices. Next slide, please. The Ncua is implementing the Small Credit Union and Minority Depository Institution Program Support Program. For the support program, small credit unions are those with less than 100 million in assets as of the prior year end. MDI support would not be limited by asset size. Ncua examiners will provide support for small and MDI credit unions that may be outside the scope of the agency's examination program. Their focus will be on answering questions, providing guidance and direction, directing management to resources, and supporting management in their efforts to address operational issues. We hope to provide support and improve outcomes of these institutions, resulting in fewer failures and mergers. Next slide, please. For more insight on the challenges MDIs and newly chartered credit unions face, Ncua will review our chartering process to identify efficiencies and provide transparency to organizing groups going through the chartering process. We will also look at the current supervisory and examination process for MDIs and newly chartered credit unions to determine how Ncua may better support these unique institutions. A second research project on MDI preservation will help Ncua better understand the work, challenges, and needs of MDIs and their members. This will directly help Ncua support and guide MDIs around affordable, profitable strategies for growth. Both research projects will result in recommendations on how Ncua may better support new charters and MDIs. Finally, Ncua has updated our new charter application guide, which is available on ncua.gov. The updated guide introduces a three-phase approach for more clarity on the chartering process. Next slide, please. We've also refined some of our tools to assist MDIs. The first is the Credit Union Locator tool. We have refined the search function to include MDIs as an option for those using this tool. Next slide, please. We've modified the Merger Partner Registry report to identify MDIs as well. This will help MDIs contemplating a merger to find MDI merger partners to preserve these unique institutions. This year, the Ncua will be developing a credit union resource page on ncua.gov with information to support MDIs. The page will include links to other agencies that support MDIs and a list of mentor credit unions. Next slide, please. The Ncua recognizes the uniqueness of MDI credit unions and how their balance sheet and income statements may appear different than that of other credit unions. As such, we're developing peer metrics for MDIs. We have invited staff to identify other areas to be used in a peer rating other than asset size alone. We've also started a study to identify the impact MDIs have on the communities and consumers they serve. This information will be used to inform Congress and the public of the importance of these institutions. Additional information will be available in the future. Supporting and preserving minority depository institutions is fundamental to the Ncua's effort to promote greater financial inclusion by expanding access to affordable, federally insured financial services. Next slide, please. In closing, I want to share some DI opportunities that lie before us. Next slide, please. Both internal to the Ncua or external to the credit union system, the Ncua is focused on building a culture of inclusion. The Office of Minority and Women Inclusion will drive this transformation by perfecting our use and analysis of data to identify performance gaps and drive our progress in addressing them. We will deliver programs that increase leader competence in inclusive behaviors, and measure its impact, and communicate why and how DEI drives inclusion, engagement, and ultimately belonging. Next slide, please. For those attending today's board meeting, I extend a warm invitation to join us at our 2022 NCUA Summit this November 2nd and 3rd. We're in the planning stages right now, and we'll share information along the way. Next slide, please. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. This concludes my presentation. I will be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Miguel, for the informative presentation on the NCUA's efforts to foster greater diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, not only within the agency, but throughout the credit union system. And Miguel, congratulations on your first board presentation as the head of our Office of Minority and Women Inclusion.
Thank you.
Additionally, I want to thank Board Member Hood for suggesting today's briefing so that we can exchange ideas on DEI best practices. At their core, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are more than just policies and principles. They are foundational practices and behaviors to be acted upon. They are vital to strategy, sustainable growth, innovation, talent acquisition, and employee retention, not only at the NCUA, but also throughout the credit union system. In recent years, we have also seen efforts to embrace and solidify principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a pillar of the credit union industry and within the broader cooperative movement. I encourage these worthy efforts to continue. Over the last year, Miguel and his team's extensive industry outreach have produced many positive results. For example, as you noted, Miguel, our second Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit attracted more than 800 participants throughout the credit union system. And the credit union diversity self-assessment numbers grew by more than 25%. At the NCUA, we believe that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are strengths that must be nurtured and supported. As such, we continue to make advances in attracting, hiring, and retaining a diverse workforce. Last year, for example, 2 out of every 5 new hires were people of color. And we have made considerable progress in our outreach to employees with disabilities. Notably, the NCUA exceeded the federal employment goals by 5.4 percentage points for employees with disabilities and 2.5 percentage points for employees with targeted disabilities. Additionally, we continue to build a diverse leadership pipeline. For example, 6 out of 10 participants in the leadership development programs were female over the last year. The NCUA also supports workforce diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts through its training, outreach and recruitment, employee resource groups, and special emphasis programs. The Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, for example, hosts diversity and inclusion-related events for employees at least once a month and sometimes more often. What is more, the NCUA is committed to supporting minority and women-owned businesses through our supplier diversity program. In 2021, the agency identified and invited minority and women-owned businesses to compete for NCUA contracts, including our largest projects. As a result of these efforts, about 37% of the NCUA's awarded contract dollars last year went to minority and women-owned businesses, and these vendors received more than 39% of contract spending. Further, we recognize that the NCUA must lead by example and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging within our agency, especially in areas where we have fallen short. For example, this year, the NCUA is focused on coordinating plans for a targeted barrier analysis to identify the challenges in hiring and retaining women and Hispanic employees within the agency. We will also seek to increase the diversity of the agency's executive and managerial ranks. And we will refine the implementation of our employee resource group program and further the work of the NCUA's Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Council begun under Chairman Hood when he was heading the agency. Miguel, I have several questions for you now. First, I understand that Hispanics and women are underrepresented in our agency compared to the civilian labor force. Would you explain what we are doing to increase their representation?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. As you know, our office has been tracking these two groups and their underrepresentation over time. We have been working on strategies in partnership with our Office of Human Resources to not only target our outreach to these audiences, but also to help keep the talented staff we successfully bring on board. As part of our recruitment outreach, we attend career fairs at Hispanic serving institutions. We attend employee conferences targeting women and Hispanics. We post classic print advertising in publications selected based on their circulation to Hispanic and women audiences. We publish electronic job postings to sites targeting these two groups. We also leverage social media to help us reach highly qualified job seekers. And we continuously communicate Ncua job opportunities with interested Hispanic and women students and professionals that we have met through our recruitment outreach efforts using an opt-in database. We're also very fortunate to have a great partnership with the members of Cultura, which is our Hispanic and Latino employee resource group. They have pledged their support to participate in a number of recruitment outreach events targeting Hispanic and Latino students and professionals, and we look forward to their continued support. But I also want to acknowledge that their contribution is not limited just to outreach. The Cultura ERG also plays an important role in the support and retention of Hispanics and Latinos within the agency. And this is similar to the role that SWAN, the employee research group supporting women within our Ncua workforce, plays in supporting and retaining women in our agency. We're also developing strategies to build direct relationships with career centers at Hispanic serving institutions, graduating a high number of Hispanics with degrees that align with our agency's needs. We also have plans to do the same for women-focused colleges and universities. As part of our data work in this area, we partner with our Office of Human Resources to regularly analyze applicant flow data on targeted populations, including Hispanics and women, to give us an indication of any possible impediments within the hiring process. We will continue to monitor our progress in these areas to ensure we move towards a level of representation that better reflects their participation in the labor market. I also wanted to share, Mr. Chairman, that we plan to start a comprehensive barrier analysis, as you mentioned earlier, later this year, focused on these two groups. We're currently building our requirement specifications for the barrier analysis work, and we look forward to engaging a contractor to support this work later this year. A barrier analysis on Hispanics and women will provide meaningful insights and direction for some of the work both the OMWI and the agency will need to do to more fully engage both of these communities. That concludes my response. I turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Miguel. And on that barrier analysis, I appreciate the work. It takes time to put together an effective analysis and to get something out the door. What's the time estimate once we start that process? Should we see something by the end of this year?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. We're currently, as I mentioned, putting together the requirement specifications, and we should hopefully have a statement of work that we can deliver out to the market through a request for a proposal within the next, hopefully 2 to 3 months. Once that happens, we actually go into a process of gathering information per the request of the vendor. Depending on the scope, we might see some initial findings by the end of the year, but more unlikely it will be into the first or second quarter of next year.
Thank you, Miguel. You have my full support on these efforts and initiatives, including the barrier analysis. And if there's anything you need from the board, please feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you,
Miguel, my second question to you is one related to belonging. During your presentation, you mentioned bringing a sense of belonging at the Ncua. Why is the concept of belonging so important for employee retention?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. Belonging is what I consider to be a composite indicator. It is the byproduct of getting both inclusion and engagement right within an organization. And it really helps demonstrate how successful we have been in delivering an inclusive and engaging environment for all employees. I would venture to say that those listening to this board briefing today have at some point experienced situations where, or been in organizations where they have not felt included or engaged or like they belong. We also recognize that if we think about it in retrospect, those type of situations and environments did not actually elicit all of our creativity, energy, or skills. So we know by our own experiences that feeling included is necessary to feeling engaged. So when as an agency, we shoot for a sense of belonging as an optimal state and we measure for it, we can gauge how effective we have been in delivering the conditions where employees are able to contribute to the best of their ability. I'm counting on the fact that achieving this state will not only make our agency a great place to work, but also boost overall performance along the way. That concludes my response. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Miguel. As you know, June is Pride Month, and that is just around the corner. Are there any plans for the agency to display the Pride flag for the first time to recognize employees of the LGBTQ+ community this year?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I am proud to say that this year the Ncua will raise this inaugural Pride flag at the agency headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. This accomplishment is due to a highly engaged employee resource group, Ncua Pride, which recognized the opportunity for our agency to recognize Pride Month and acknowledge the LGBTQ+ members of our staff and those who have friends or family members in this broad community. The Pride ERG is coordinating the flag raising event, and I look forward to your support in kicking off Pride Month for the agency. We're definitely looking forward to this first ever event.
That's very good to hear, Miguel, and certainly I look forward to joining you at this milestone of raising the flag. Now, one other thing I want to discuss is that in your presentation, you considered what we are doing for small and minority credit unions. An important part of the NCUA's efforts to support these credit unions is the preservation of minority depository institutions to the greatest extent possible, including when a minority credit union is in financial difficulty and the best option is to merge that troubled institution into another credit union. The FDIC, as I understand, allows MDIs extra time for assembling their merger applications and bids when the institution being merged is an MDI. What is the NCUA doing in this area, and is there something more that we should do?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. At the present time, regional offices work closely with MDIs that are contemplating a merger. And in some instances, this includes extending or providing extra time for mergers to take place. As I shared earlier in the slide deck, the NCUA has modified the merger partner registry report to identify MDIs, which is an added resource to assist in the preservation of these institutions. That concludes my response. I now turn it over back to you, sir.
Thank you. Certainly, Miguel, to the extent possible, we should consider whatever the FDIC is doing in this area and work to expand. I'm glad that we are making initial steps in this. Lastly, I do have one question that comes up through my work on the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council. There, I learned that the other federal banking agencies do not use peer metrics when assessing MDIs because MDIs often operate with a different business model that makes it difficult to compare them to other credit unions of the same asset size. To me, this recognition makes a lot of sense. After all, some MDIs have higher cost structures and more expenses to serve their members. How could the NCUA implement a similar change for MDI examinations, and what would be the time frame for implementing this adjustment? Also, how can the NCUA equip examiners with the tools needed to better assess MDI performance?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We recognize the importance of the issue and we're looking further into it. Our Credit Union Resources and Expansion Office is currently working on the MDI peer metrics, taking it beyond just asset classification, but that project is still in the initial stages of development. We hope to have some additional MDI supports in place by 2023. As to your question regarding equipping examiners with the tools needed to better assess MDI performance, as part of the Advancing Communities Through Credit, Education, Stability, and Support initiative that the agency launched in 2021, the NCUA is looking to add some MDI-specific scope tasks to the examination process. When added, the agency will train our examiners on the new examination process and how to better assess an MDI's financial condition while taking into consideration the institution's role in its community and its membership. That concludes my response. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Miguel. That modification of our exam policy for MDIs is very important to me. So I look forward to us having progress in this area in the coming months. In closing, I'd like to thank my colleagues, both Vice Chairman Haltman and Board Member Hood, for their continued support of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives at the Ncua. The Ncua is committed to advancing these principles in its workforce, through its business activities, and within the credit union system throughout this year and beyond this year. That concludes my questions and remarks. I now recognize Vice Chairman Haltman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, Miguel, for the presentation. Nice job, especially since I think it's your first time presenting. I want to mention that when you interviewed for this role, there were a number of very qualified candidates. But after our conversation last week, I am even more convinced that you are the right person for this job. So I just want to say that at the outset. I wholeheartedly agree with Chairman Harper and Board Member Hood on their commitment to leveraging the power of diversity and inclusion within the Ncua. And Miguel, I want to congratulate you and your team for the work you're doing to foster greater diversity and inclusion in this agency. We're better and stronger when we utilize the full range of skills and insights that come from a diverse workforce. But I want to step back and talk about financial inclusion in general. As the original answer to financial inclusion in America, the credit union movement itself is, by definition, diverse. As you know, we have credit unions formed around faith-based groups. We have credit unions formed around ethnic groups, such as the 11 Ukrainian American credit unions that are in focus lately. There are credit unions amongst American Indian tribes. And we have credit unions formed among employee groups, public servants, farmers, military personnel, educational systems, and so forth. And in order to maintain that diversity among credit unions, including among more recent immigrant groups, I feel Ncua should also focus its DEI efforts on how our regulatory practices affect financial inclusion among America's 130 million credit union members, and not mostly focus on Ncua's 1,100 well-educated employees. Just let me give you an example. In preparation for this meeting, I read our press release for last year's OMWI report. It mentions that Ncua facilitated a number of conversations on racial injustice after the 2020 death of George Floyd. Okay, I agree, that's an important topic. But I recently found out that at the same time as George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, a group was trying to start a new credit union in George Floyd's neighborhood in North Minneapolis. It's an area with many payday loan shops, but few quality financial services providers. That group's organizer said last month that she felt humiliated by how hard Ncua made the de novo process. That group gave up on a federal charter and are now pursuing a state charter. But then they still felt Ncua wasted their time by not clarifying the work needed for a federal charter versus just seeking Ncua insurance. Now, I am proud that over the last year, we've made progress on our chartering process. And because regardless of what we say about supporting small credit unions and minority deposit institutions, neither of those categories include those trying to start a new credit union. But that example from George Floyd's neighborhood is what I'm talking about when I urge all of us at Ncua to remember what true financial inclusion means. Those small credit unions and those seeking a new charter are people taking direct control of their financial well-being by forming their own credit union, a financial institution they own and control dedicated to their specific needs. And perhaps the only thing more satisfying than taking your business elsewhere is starting your own business offering better products. So if we are serious about financial inclusion, we must be sure these groups have a clear path to form their own credit union. We, Ncua, shouldn't be making it one bit harder for groups that want to form their own credit union. And 2 weeks ago, we released our Streamline chartering guide, and I want to thank the staff that made that possible. But we can't stop there. I'd like to call on my fellow board members to make financial inclusion more prominent in our thinking throughout all of Ncua's operations. We cannot congratulate ourselves on our DEI efforts if we add any extra burden on small credit unions and those speaking to start one. So Miguel, you and I kind of had a version of this conversation last week. Do you agree that Ncua can and should continually examine our regulatory practices to ensure we're focused on financial inclusion among Americans, especially those who might be most hurt by ineffective regulation?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Vice Chairman. After over 10 years at the Ncua, I can say that financial inclusion is the North Star that connects all of us in the credit union movement. And in my view, all the work that we do is in support of that. So when it comes to financial inclusion, minority depository institutions are at the forefront of that effort. Section 367 of the Dodd-Frank Act mandates that the Ncua, among other financial regulatory agencies, follow the requirements established in the Financial Institution Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989, which is the FARIA Act of 1989. Sections 308 of that act calls for methods to create and preserve MDIs, including the preservation of the minority character in cases of a merger or acquisition of an MDI, and the delivery of technical assistance to those institutions. The Ncua's MDI program is operated by our colleagues in the Office of Credit Union Resources and Expansion, and that office is also one of the leads in the launch and advancement of the Ncua's Access Initiative, which was deployed to directly promote financial inclusion for all within the credit union system. In terms of reviewing our practices and operations, I understand that the new Charter Modernization Project and the MDI Supervision and Examination Project are two items that represent instances when the agency is reviewing its practices and operations to further support financial inclusion within the credit union movement. Surely all of us will continue to work to improve on how the agency can support the advancement of financial inclusion within the credit union industry. And although not an explicit part of our Section 342 mandate, the OMWI also supports financial inclusion, has incorporated elements of financial inclusion in some of its work. For example, our DEI Summit last year included at least 6 distinct workshops on financial inclusion. Finally, while I'm not directly responsible for the review of Ncua's regulation, I am supportive of ensuring that Ncua does whatever it can to promote financial inclusion as we are working to go through the Access Initiative. Of course, while the Office of General Counsel is the lead office responsible for coordinating review of Ncua regulations, through Access, we're partnering with OGC, the Office of General Counsel, and that work could lead to propose changes to Ncua's regulations in an effort to promote financial inclusion. That concludes my response. I turn it over back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Detailed, thoughtful response. Yeah, I think we agreed that when that organization in Minneapolis, the Association for Black Economic Power, trying to build wealth, that's what they say on their website. When we at Ncua have documented flaws in our process where we didn't get back to them, left them hanging, ignored them, didn't make things clear, I think we need to watch our level of self-congratulation when we're treating people like groups like that, because if it's happening there, it's probably happening a lot of places, not just de novo, but anything we do that adds 1 more minute, 1 more hour, 1 more form, inhibits true financial inclusion. I think it's usually the have-nots that get hit the hardest. And you mentioned the summit. I'll just end here. I think I said to you last week, I volunteer to moderate a panel on Ncua's operations this fall. I'm not in charge of the program, but just want to raise my hand, and you know I'm passionate about this. So if you need a panelist or a moderator, I'm happy to join. That concludes. Nice job again, Miguel, and I will send it back to Chairman Harper.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Haldeman. We'll certainly take you up on that offer. Board Member Hood, is there anything you would like to ask or add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Miguel. We're so delighted that you are our newly minted OMWI director, and I'm delighted that the industry gets a chance to hear from you directly this morning.
Thank you,
I
sir.
must say that for me, these DEI discussions are more than simply abstracts. They are, in fact, personal. In fact, in my banking career for nearly 3 decades, I've attended conferences and professional events where I am and was often the only man of color in the room. I've arrived early to speak on a panel discussion, and people were surprised to actually learn that I was actually the participant. And I certainly vividly remember the high school conversations with my father about how to engage with the police when pulled over, and my mother performing safety checks on my car before I went out on the weekends to ensure the signals and brake lights were all functioning properly so that there would be no legitimate reason for me to be pulled over in the first place. In 2022, I find myself having similar conversations with my young African-American cousins and youngsters that I even mentor. So I must say that you all individually and collectively, we can in fact make a difference, one conversation and one relationship at a time. I'm very proud that at the NCUA, we are striving for ways to lead on these issues around DEI. One of my top priorities for my board tenure is financial inclusion, which means expanded access to the financial mainstream for underserved communities, as well as diverse hiring, contracting, and board membership. I also joined with Chairman Harper several years ago in calling for the creation of the NCUA Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Council to focus on issues of inclusion within the agency. True inclusion within our financial regulators, financial institutions, and communities is a goal we must all strive towards. Diversity is indeed important, but without cultural change that encourages true inclusion, it risks being little more than checking the right boxes. In my public comments around the country, I've talked to thousands of credit union leaders, employees, fellow regulators, and members about the importance, again, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everywhere I go, I describe the financial inclusion as the civil rights issue of our time. And I must say that I'm both heartened and reassured that this message has been so well and warmly received. For the NCUA to effectively carry out its mission, every staff member should be respected and diversity and inclusion should be truly fostered. All of our NCUA employees should come to work knowing that they can bring their true, authentic selves to work, and that we will certainly give them the respect and all of the attention they need so they can improve the lives of hardworking credit union members in ways both big and small. I know this is a mission that makes me excited to come to work each and every day because we are all responsible for protecting the safety and soundness of America's credit union system and the 130 million members who rely upon this system every day. Chairman Harper said in his recent DEI report to Congress, and I quote, "At their core, diversity, equity, and inclusion are far more than policies and principles. Of course, intentions are meaningless without concrete actions and behaviors." I end quote. And to that end, Mr. Chairman, I would like to publicly say that we are in complete and lockstep agreement. I also would like to thank you for continuing to fight for diversity, equity, and inclusion at the NCUA. And in fact, it's worth pointing out that just last year, 2 of every 5 new hires were people of color. I want to thank Vice Chairman Haltman for his unwavering commitment to MDIs and to also financial inclusion. I definitely believe that our de novo institutions can go a long way towards addressing some of the intractable issues that are facing communities of color. Now, shifting gears, Miguel, I do have some questions for you. On slide 12, could you go there, please? Can you reiterate how our supplier diversity spend compares to that of our peer regulators?
Thank you for the question, Board Member Hood. As you can see on slide 12, the NCUA awarded 37% of its contract dollars to minority and women-owned businesses last year. Based on the 2021 supply diversity results reported by the OMWI offices at the other federal financial regulators, the percent of contract dollars awarded to minority and women-owned businesses range across that group from just over 18% to as high as 49%. The NCUA was on the higher end of that range reported by the OMWI offices, coming in about third among the 8 Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. That concludes my response.
Great, thank you for that. And one of the things I'd like to add, Miguel, is that when I speak with a number of our credit unions, those who are talking about filling out and working around our diversity survey, one of the things many have asked is, what are things they can do that go a step beyond the hiring and the retention of talent? And I often talk to them about the importance of supplier diversity. And are they looking at their supply chain in ways that they can perhaps support small minority-owned businesses? So I'm delighted that we are leading by that example. In fact, just last night, in addition to being kept awake thinking about cybersecurity, I was reading a McKinsey report that talked about what's being now referred to as the Great Supply Chain Reset, where we're talking about in that report, where they're talking about how companies, if they really want to go further than some of the pledges that they've made around diversity, equity, and inclusion, they really want to go further than hiring. They need to look at the supply chain when it comes to, again, helping those suppliers that are diverse. So I'm glad to know that we are working diligently in that. And I look forward to hearing more about upcoming ideas you have around supplier diversity events with our peer regulators, where we invite those suppliers to our financial agencies, and then they can hear what our staffing needs are, what our equipment needs are, and all the other things that it takes to continue to build out a very robust diversity spin. I now want to shift gears and talk about MDIs, and I know we talked a little bit about this with the vice chairman. When an MDI credit union has to merge, do we give preference directly to another MDI institution?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Hood. By way of the interpretative ruling and policy statement 13-1, the NCUA will use FARIA's prescribed general preference guidelines to attempt to preserve the minority character of failing MDIs that are involuntarily merged or acquired. In the event of an involuntary merger or acquisition of a troubled MDI, NCUA is going to invite bids from MDIs that are qualified to partner with a failing MDI, along with non-MDI credit unions. To be considered as an acquirer, an MDI is strongly encouraged to document its desire to acquire another MDI by registering itself on NCUA's merger registry via the CU Online system. I don't think there's anything in our rules or policy that says that we will give a precedence.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. And continuing along that whole subject around MDIs, I'd love to get a feel for whether or not there are any regulatory benefits given to our MDIs. I'm very proud of the fact that of the institutions that we oversee, almost 50% of them have the designation of the low-income credit union designation, which, as many know, that means that they are exempt from the 12.25% cap on their MBL, and they also are eligible to pursue secondary capital or subordinated debt. What are some of the regulatory benefits that are available to our MDIs at all?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Hood. At this time, there are no regulatory benefits that are specific to MDIs. However, currently the benefits are only offered to low-income designated credit unions. And right now, approximately 81% of low-income designated credit unions are MDIs as well. So that comes to be about 411 MDIs as of the end of the year.
Very well. Well, then, if that being the case, Miguel, thank you for that response. Perhaps I, along with the chairman and vice chairman, maybe we can look at seeing what could be some of the regulatory benefits, whether it be unlimited non-member deposits and things along those lines, and would certainly like to see what we can do to perhaps provide some of that type of relief similar to that of our LIQs. So I'll move on now in the interest of time. We talked about the diversity survey, and I know that many credit unions are hesitant to submit data because they are, again, concerned that data will be used against them during their exam. I try to allay their concerns. I try to do whatever I can to let them know that those are not going to be held against them. What would you say to someone who raises this objection around submitting their data?
No, thank you for the question, Board Member Hood. I mean, we recognize this concern, and I want to assure credit unions that any information they submit through the self-assessment is securely stored within my office and is not available to those who perform examinations or other contacts. Submitting a CUTSA has no bearing on a credit union's CAMELS rating, and I want to repeat that submitting a CUTSA has no bearing on a credit union's CAMELS rating, and it only offers credit unions access to a tool that can improve their performance in many ways. To those credit unions who share this concern, I encourage you to review our annual CUTSA report and to visit the NCUA's YouTube channel and watch some of the sessions from our 2021 DI Summit. You can learn more about the business results you can expect when your leaders commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and hopefully reconsider using the self-assessment to advance your institution's maturity. Credit unions can also complete the self-assessment without submitting it to identify best practices. Of course, the more credit unions that complete and submit a CUTSA, the better the NCUA will be able to identify what support or assistance the industry may benefit from, so we can tailor our work to meet their needs. That concludes my response, Mr. Hood.
Great, thank you, Miguel. And I hope that our thousands of credit unions are listening to that response so that they will in fact complete the survey, because it really does give us a baseline, and then we can know where growth and what other opportunities are manifesting themselves. So thank you for that. And I also try to reiterate what you've just said. One more question, and that is, what is Ncra doing to increase MDIs in Alaska and Hawaii, where Native Alaskans and Hawaiians are a part of the field of membership?
Thank you for that question, Board Member Hood. In 2020, the Office of Credit Union and Resources Expansion initiated a letter campaign to non-MDI credit unions in Alaska and Hawaii. That letter was signed by you as chairman of the time, and it provided information about the MDI designation and self-designation process. Total of 29 letters were sent, one to Otoe Misoria, the Native American Credit Union Charter, during 2019. 18 letters went to all non-MDIs in Hawaii, and 10 went to all non-MDIs in Alaska. As of the end of 2021, the Otoe Misoria, the Native American Credit Union, is now an MDI, and 8 Hawaiian credit unions that received the letter are now an MDI as well. Unfortunately, none of the Alaskan credit unions that received the letter are MDIs at this time. The March 2022 MDI list will become available when the agency releases the first quarter 2022 call data report. That concludes my response. Now back to you, Mr. Hood.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Miguel. And I'm so delighted that you mentioned the Otoe Misoria Federal Credit Union. That was one of the first charters I was able to present in person when I became chairman in 2019. So it was wonderful to go there and to really talk to the tribal leaders and to see firsthand what a difference access to affordable financial services is going to play there in that tribal area. So to my fellow board members, if you've not had a chance to go and experience the excitement firsthand of presenting a de novo charter, you are in store for a treat. So I was delighted to be there, and I hope that there are many others during my term here. With that being said, Miguel, pleased with the DEI summit that you hosted last year. Cannot wait to be a part of this year's. Many of you, when we did our first summit around 2019, I, as chairman at the time, was so amazed at the number of folks and the excitement that I basically on the spot said, this is something NCUA should do each and every year. And Chairman Harper, I'm delighted that we're continuing with that tradition of hosting the DEI summit. Very rarely do you have summits where the participants say they wish it could last longer than a day. So that means that we really are providing relevant, timely information to an industry that really does want to do the good thing around people helping people. With that being said, you all, I have no other comments. And again, Miguel, thank you. We look forward to working with you in the days ahead and your world onward.
Thank you, Board Member Hood.
And thank you as well, Board Member Hood. I have to agree with you. I recently did a new charter ribbon cutting virtually for a credit union in Texas, and the energy which was in that room really just came through and across the internet. It made me feel like it was almost there. And I also want to thank you on your having the foresight and getting the Access Initiative started, which we're continuing to roll out and expand upon, as well as your ideas for what more can we do to make the MDI designation a desirable one and some benefits attached to it. I also, Vice Chairman Huffman, want to thank you for raising the issue of the charter organizers in Minnesota. I'm going to be meeting with that group soon, and I agree with you. We have to be focused on customer service. It should underlie every action that we take at the agency. I also embrace your call for focusing on financial inclusion. It's right at the heart of what the statutory mission of the credit union system is, which is to meet the credit and savings needs of members, especially those of modest means. We can do that through field of membership rulemaking changes, which staff are now working on, new charter process changes, which we're continuing to evolve, as well as our financial literacy efforts. All of those go into financial inclusion. We also have this year, as part of our revolving loan fund grants, a very specific pot of money that allows up to $50,000 to credit unions to focus on creating programs to serve the underserved. That's a great way to bring in inclusion. I know we have 1.5 million, a little more than that this year. I know that the request to Congress has been sent to 4 million. I'm certainly very supportive of getting that more money, because with that we can do more for financial inclusion. And then finally, I am looking forward to working with both of our fellow board members on the Emergency Capital Investment Program, further refinements, rulemakings that we will need to do later this year to make sure that those credit unions that receive that funding can use it for the full 30 years, really to bring financial inclusion within their communities. So thank you both. With that, that is the end of our business today. There being no further business at hand, we are hereby adjourned. Thank you.
You.